Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning back in. Guys, my phone has not stopped blowing up for the last couple of days regarding this potential ban of live scope and 360 imaging in the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, I live in Wisconsin, and therefore a lot of people are curious as to what is going on with that. So I figured I would kind of walk you through the process of how this has all come about and what this actually means, and provide you with a little bit of input because I've seen some misinformation on the internet. There's people talking about this now across the country. And if you don't live in Wisconsin or you're not familiar with the process, it's not as simple as just there's a vote and it's going to be banned. So first off, let me walk you through a little bit of the process. In Wisconsin, we have what's called the Conservation Congress. This is kind of like an elected group of delegates or people throughout the state that are there to inform the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources as to like what type of management we'd like for the resources. So it's a group of people that are elected. They then go to the Department of Natural Resources and present the findings. So part of that process is this spring questionnaire that they put out. So this is it's a right here. It's a multi-page questionnaire of different types of questions that are presented to the general public to get voted on. So to get onto this questionnaire, there's a pretty long, lengthy process as well. In some cases, it takes up to a year and able to even get to the point where you can get your questions into the spring questionnaire. So you go through the process of writing up all this proposal. If it gets approved, it gets on the questionnaire. Then it goes to a vote. So this year in 2024, the spring hearings are held in every county in the state at 6 p.m. on April 8th, I believe is what it is this year. So everywhere in the county, every county in the state has a meeting. You can go there. You can discuss all the questions. There's open discussion basically. And then there's a online portal where you can add your input, I believe, a couple of days later. I think this year it's the 10th through the 12th of April, I believe. So it basically allows the citizens of Wisconsin to be able to vote on how we want to manage our resources. And when you go through these questions, it's a little bit of everything. So, just to flip through it, let's see. Question 12, do you support legislation that would create a single raccoon hunting season starting date for both residents and non-residents? Here's one for my local county. I live in Portage County. Question number 4. Would you support reducing the daily bag limit of panfish on McDill Pond in Portage County from 25 to 10 panfish to maintain and improve panfish abundance and size? So there's questions, and then within each question, there's a little bit of background that's provided. So the question that has everybody up in an uproar right now across the country is question number 22. So question number 22 states, the actual question is, would you support banning the use of live scopes and similar 360 imaging electronics in all Wisconsin waters? And then the little bit of a description, which is one of the smallest descriptions for any question, is with the ability of these types of units to detect fish as far as 180 feet out from the user, anglers have become more efficient at locating and catching fish. This type of pressure could reduce fish populations, which may lead to reduced bag limits for anglers. Pretty generic a description there, right? Versus some of these other ones that talk a little bit more specific about what that's for. So that's question number 2. That's the one that has everybody up in an uproar. Here's one, question 26. Would you support the Conservation Congress working with the state legislature to designate monarch butterfly as the Wisconsin state butterfly, right? There's questions about everything. But it is an interesting question, because if this does get voted in favor by the public, it then goes the next step. It goes to the state, and then it goes to the DNR, and then at that point they can actually enact it as a law, which would be, I believe, the next year out. So generally this process is like 2 or 3 year process. It is a lengthy process. This is kind of the first steps in it. So it's not like if it gets voted in favor of, it immediately goes into law. So that's the process. Now, there's a lot of questions regarding this. And there's a so one issue I have, and this is with the state of Wisconsin and the way we do things versus just this question. I love the fact that we as citizens have the ability to vote on how to manage our resources. Now, having said that, oftentimes what I have found is that everyone votes in a very selfish manner. As an example of this, what I considered the best largemouth lake in the country, the Chippewa Flowage. It's a large body of water, northern Wisconsin. You could go catch 20 plus pounds of largemouth, no problem. It was taking, at its peak time, it was taking close to 50 pounds for a 2 day tournament to win. That's unheard of for largemouth fishing in Wisconsin. Well, because we take this approach of allowing people to decide how to manage these resources, the Chippewa Flowage Lake Association basically had the Department of Resources manage that lake, the Chippewa Flowage, as a walleye fishery. Well, as part of that, what the management process was or decided upon was to remove the largemouth. They took the size limit off, they allowed the daily bag limit to be unlimited, they encouraged the resorts to have catch and cook tournaments. Well, now the largemouth fishing is a fraction of what it used to be. The walleye fishing still is not anything really different than what it used to be because, well, there's a lot of reasons why. I'm not going to get into that. But the fact is, we've dictated how to manage that fishery for a species that wasn't doing that well anyways. And now we've kind of destroyed it as the top largemouth lake in the state, in my opinion. And it still hasn't gotten really any better as a walleye fishery. So from that standpoint, as much as I feel like we should have a say, it should be like the professional's job, who you hope is the DNR, to say, hey, this fishery is prime for largemouth. Maybe we should manage it that way. Maybe the resorts on that lake should figure out how to capitalize on it being the best tournament body of water in the state versus, hey, how can we generate some walleye and get people to come? I'm going off on a tangent here. I'm using that simply as an example of allowing us necessarily to vote on this isn't always the right way to go about it. Now, again, in this case, we should have some say, right? So whether this gets voted on in favor of or against, it's not necessarily going into a law. But I will say there is some additional concerns here, selfishly, as a angler in the state of Wisconsin. I do have serious questions as to how this is going to be policed. I mean, and is it like an automatic ticket if I have it on my boat? And how does the DNR warden know that I'm even using it? Like, if I don't necessarily want to have to put it on my boat and take it off my boat every time I leave the state of Wisconsin. So from that standpoint, I don't know how that's going to be policed. I don't know, the ramifications potentially from a revenue standpoint. Like, would there be people that don't necessarily want to come to Wisconsin from other states, which is a very large part of our tourism dollars, because they don't want to mess with taking off the live scope? Are there people that would come to our state because they want to support a state that doesn't have live scope? Would professional level tournaments say, hey, we're not coming to Wisconsin now? Or would professional level tournaments say, we want to go to Wisconsin now because we can use that as the excuse to have a no forward facing sonar tournament? Like, I don't know where this would go. I don't even know how I feel about all this. I'm not real comfortable with saying the government should have the ability to tell us that we can't use it to go fishing. I mean, I know people would say, well, they put restrictions on the Alabama rig, but the reality is they didn't really put restrictions on the Alabama rig. In the state of Wisconsin, we already had a law that said you can't have more than 3 hooks. So from that standpoint, okay, well, the Alabama rig came out, so the DNR made the decision that said we have this law says you can have 3 hooks, so your Alabama rigs cannot have more than 3 hooks. that was already kind of in place with respect to that. And I know there's people out there that go, well, from the standpoint of it, you can't spotlight deer. Well, yeah, I don't necessarily want people hunting deer at night. I don't want people, you're talking about somebody firing a gun potentially versus somebody making a cast. It's not like there's a big difference there in my opinion. I understand the idea of spotlighting a fish and spotlighting deer, but there's other ramifications that go into that. So it's really I'm very perplexed. I'm very perplexed on this whole thing as a whole, but I do think like if it comes down to somebody making the decision to tell me I can and cannot use it, I kind of feel like it should be my tournament organizations that are saying that based on a rule in the tournament versus the government telling me I can't use that tool. And I know that there's going to be people out there that are saying, well, what about conservation? It's depleting the resources. And honestly, I do agree with that to a point. I mean, I know of a couple lakes that are not the same crappie lakes up here in Wisconsin because they've pretty much been devastated by forward-facing sonar. I myself am not a great crappie fisherman, and I can go out and catch a limited crappie in a heartbeat because I know exactly where the school's at. I totally get it. Like in Wisconsin, you're talking about a lot of lakes that are a couple hundred acres versus going to Kentucky Lake where there's 2 billion crappie in a 170-mile long lake. Like there's a lot of things to weigh. I'm not saying I'm in favor of this or against this, but it is a crazy time that we're living in. Now, I will say, you know, that's not the question on here that concerns me. Question number 22 is concerning from the standpoint of banning live scopes or not, which I also have I have issue with the fact that they say live scopes because there's going to be people that read that and go, well, I've got a Lowrance active target. Doesn't say live scopes. They're actually using the term live scopes, which is a product name. So from that, and a 360. So from that standpoint, the wording in here, I think you could make the argument that says you can't use a Garmin live scope and you can't use a Humminbird 360. It doesn't say I can't use a Lowrance active target. So I think there's going to be people that make that case to begin with. But here's the issue with this whole thing. I don't know if it matters how you say or how you vote on question number 22, for or against it, if you vote in favor of question number 1 on here. Like this to me is very political. So the question number 1 is specifically, do you favor the department working with the Conservation Congress to develop an administrative pathway that would allow for faster angling regulation changes in instances where an adequate amount of data show an immediate need for preservation and restoration of a population of naturally reproducing native or naturalized fish species? So in the paragraph description here, it basically says, I'll just read the whole thing to you. It says, in Wisconsin, there's an administrative rulemaking pathway for prompt angling regulation changes that can be used in instances when slow growth of a particular fish species has been documented or when reverting to the default or statewide regulation. Unfortunately, this pathway, which is what we're talking about here, this process of Conservation Congress, unfortunately, this pathway cannot currently be used to address an immediate conservation need, such as a declining walleye population where natural reproduction is found to be failing. In these cases, the ability to move to a conservative harvest regulation promptly could help move the fish population onto the pathway to recovery. Timely management actions, including angling regulation changes, are sometimes needed to protect fisheries from further decline and or to begin rehabilitative efforts. The current 2 to 3 year process, which is what we're talking about here, the current 2 to 3 year process for changing angling regulations in Wisconsin can hinder the efforts of fish biologists and local partners when immediate long-term rehabilitative action is needed, leaving fish populations vulnerable to harm. The way I read this, if you vote yes for question 1, they can fast track whatever they want. So even if you vote against forward-facing sonar or for banning forward-facing sonar. So if you vote to not ban it, the way I read this, if they say, hey, they have an immediate need to save a fish population, which is questionable and subjective right there, that they could potentially ban it anyways if you vote yes to takes this step in question 1. So I don't know if it even matters how you vote with respect to the forward-facing sonar, because question 1 is the one on that whole thing that actually concerns me the most. So I'll leave it at that. That's all I'm saying. If you live in the state of Wisconsin, you can go vote on April 8th at 6 p.m. Every county in the state has it. And if you can't go vote on that day, you can leave your input on the internet, I think it's the Conservation Congress website, which you can get to through the DNR website. And you can leave your input there. So we'll leave it with that. Thanks for watching, guys. We're in a crazy time. We'll have another video coming out tomorrow.